I guess my journey with what was to become known as punk rock started on November the 27th, 1973, when the New York Dolls appeared on Britain's only TV rock show, The Old Grey Whistle Test. They performed Jet Boy, and the performance was mimed except for lead singer David Johansen's vocals and a lot of dropped microphones. The group brimmed with attitude, sleaze and pure don't give a flying fuckness. Back in 1973, most rock stars seemed to be up there on a pedestal, whereas the Dolls seemed like it was your mates just getting up there and having a laugh. At the time, glam rock was still popular in the UK. In the charts we had Bowie, Bolan, The Sweet, even Mick Jagger and the Stones were wearing eyeliner. But the Dolls looked like they had just raided their girlfriends' wardrobes and makeup boxes and took whatever was available at that time. And while maybe the Stones, Alice Cooper, Bowie hinted at sleaze, decadence and anarchy, the Dolls looked like they walked it, like they talked it. Johansen on lead vocals, Johnny Thunder on guitar looked like the younger, more outrageous brothers of Jagger and Richards. Sylvain looked like he'd just wandered in from last night's party, while Arthur Kane on bass hardly moved. I heard a story about how during a session for the Dolls' first album, the band were in full swing, but the producer, Todd Rundgren, had to stop proceedings and come down from the mixing desk and plug Arthur's bass in. Jerry Nolan on drums you could hardly see as the cameraman focused in on the front three of Sylvain, Johnson and Thunders. When they'd finished, the show's host, whispering Bob Harris, famously described the performance as mock rock. Me, I felt change. While at the time, don't get me wrong, there was loads of great music around, but some of the spark, the rebellion, the passion had disappeared. It seemed like you had to have a degree in music to make it. You had to be so technically proficient. You had to practice for hours. Whereas the Dolls just picked it up as they went along. You want to play? Just play. Learn what you need to and plug in and go. Or in the words of Sylvain, fake it till you make it. You'd often see in the press at that time how the band was so poor and only passably competent as musicians. But here's the rub. Go and have a listen to that first album. It's pretty damn amazing. The thing with the Dolls is they could write. They could write songs. Perfect 3 or 4 minute nuggets filled with hooks, melodies, carefree rock and roll, attitude and laced with New York street smarts. Critic David Frike argued that that first Dolls album was the definitive glam rock album. More so than Ziggy Stardust or anything by Mark Bolan, because the band captured all the glory and the sorrow of glam, the hijinks and the wasted youth. For that first album, Todd Rundgren was employed as producer, and if you go on the internet you can find many stories on the friction, the relationship between Todd and the band. But at the end of the day, who cares? They came up with a killer album. On the album, you blend up the MC5, the Stones, some Little Richards, some Jerry Lee Lewis, and don't believe the hype. This band could play. Over the years, I've read many reviews of that Dolls' first album, and one thing tons of reviewers have missed is go and have a close look at the songwriting. The lyrics, they are pure genius. Mostly written by David Johansen with a little help from other band members. But it's the observations, the pinpoint observations on life, teenage angst, the war in Vietnam, drugs. One reviewer, Frank Cogan, wrote this. Johansen writes in a perplexing fictional style that is lazy yet ingenious, as it provides his lyrics an abundance of emotional meaning and interpretation. David never provides an objective framework. He's always jumping from voice to voice. So you're hearing a character addressing another character, or the narrator addressing the character, or the character or the narrator addressing us, all jammed up together, so you're hearing bits of conversation and bits of subjective description in no chronological order. So for all those people who dismissed the Dolls as bozos and mock rock and all of the insults, go and have a look at those lyrics. They are the work of genius. I'm just going to include one of my favourite stories about the Dolls. When they were in school, Sylvain saw Johnny Thunders and he said, you know, that guy's got to be in a band. Walked over to him and suggested to him that they form a band. Thunders, no, not interested. A few days later, Thunders comes back to Sylvain and says, Sylvain, how many strings on a guitar? Sylvain says, 6, Johnny. Okay, how many strings on a bass guitar? 4, Johnny. Okay, I'm going to be your bass guitarist. The very few critics that championed the Dolls back in 1973 would often reference a couple of other bands, the MC5 and the Stooges. So these were going to be the next port of calls on my journey. The MC5 kick out the jams. Back in late 1973 and early 1974, trying to find any MC5 albums in London seemed to be an almost impossible task. But eventually I managed to track down a copy of Kick Out the Jams. Kick Out the Jams was recorded live at Detroit's Grand Ballroom over 2 nights in 1968. It's now regarded as one of the greatest live albums of all time. A friend of mine aptly described the album like this: the band play every song like an encore, and it's as if their very lives depend on giving it everything they have. There can't be many albums that capture the raw intensity of a band at full speed like this album. If you want raw, powerful, intense rock music that takes no prisoners, then this album is definitely for you. And you know, it takes some balls to put out a live album as your debut album. It did actually reach number 30 on the Billboard charts. Unfortunately, vocalist Rob Tyner's introduction, famous or infamous introduction to the title song with the words, right now, right now, right now, it's time to kick out the jams, motherfuckers, led to the record being censored and some record stores refusing to stock it. Ludicrously, you could buy 2 versions of the album, one on the racks with the offending words replaced with brothers and sisters, or one behind the counter with the original intro intact. To make matters worse, back in the States, Hudson's department stores refused to carry the album. Tensions between the band and the Hudson's chain escalated to the point that the department store refused to carry any album from the Elektra label, after the MC5 took out a full-page ad that was just a picture of Rob Tyner, and underneath all it said was "Fuck Hudson's," and it also included the Elektra logo. To end the conflict and to avoid further financial loss, Elektra dropped the band from their record label. But later the same year, Jefferson Airplane recorded the song "We Can Be Together" for their Volunteers album, a song containing the word motherfucker. Unlike Elektra, RCA Records released the album wholly uncensored. But let's get back to the music. Buckle up as the Motor City 5 take you through a bruising, heavy, sonic roller coaster of a ride, covering rebellion, anarchy, sex in the street, drugs and rock and roll. Bassist Michael Davis and drummer Dennis Thompson sound like they are having a bottom-end war with each other. Wayne Kramer and Fred Sonic Smith duel it out with crunching riffs, blistering lead work and crazed howling feedback. While Rob Tyner on vocals probably needed to lie down in a darkened room for days after these shows just to recover. Kick Out the Jams should have been the start of an incredible career for one of rock's great bands. Sadly, it was not to be. By 1970, the MC5 had signed to Atlantic Records and were given Jon Landau, former Rolling Stone critic, as a producer for their new album. This was Landau's debut in the producer's chair, and though he would go on to do great things with Bruce Springsteen, this was not his finest moment. Now, it took me months and months of searching the record racks for a copy of this album, but at the end of the day, it was sure worth it. Lackluster production notwithstanding. It's one of those albums that as soon as it finishes, you want to hear it again, you want to play it again, you've got this compulsion to play it again. I guess it just gets its hooks into you. It's that sort of album. It clocks in at 28 minutes, 8 seconds. But that's part of the magic. It doesn't outstay its welcome. And everything is delivered with laser sharp accuracy. Everyone on this album is on point. And you can clearly hear how it influenced bands like The Damned, The Pistols, The Dolls. Speed it up a little bit and you've got the Ramones. It's probably the greatest garage rock album ever. But when the album came out, it divided the fans. Many wanted the MC5 to stick to the all-out sonic assault of Kick Out the Jams and weren't prepared to accept this edgy garage rock sound. Many critics at the time thought so too, and the album didn't do well and bombed. Here's Lemmy's opinion of the album. In a time of terrible manufactured music, back in the USA was rock and roll untreated. I used to sit and listen to the album for hours, listen to it all the way through and then put it straight back on again. It was the kind of album you could do that with, particularly the odd songs like Human Being Lawnmower. It was impossible to see the structure of that song for a while. You'd think, fuck it, what's going on there? Then you'd sit and work it all out. My favourite track off the MC5 album would have to be Chuck Berry's Back in the USA. Lemmy, when he formed Motorhead, originally wanted the band to be a 5-piece in the style of the MC5. Now on Back in the USA, tracks you must hear: Shaking Street, The Human Being Lawnmower, The American Ruse, Call Me Animal, Back in the USA. In fact, let's be honest, the whole bloody album. Now, when I got these two records, and I kept playing them over and over again, and they're just absolutely brilliant. I don't know why I couldn't bring myself to go and find the band's final album, High Times. I think I felt at the time it could only be a disappointment after the brilliance of these first two records, but I must get around to it sometime. So let's move on to Iggy and the Stooges, the first album and Funhouse. Now, don't get me wrong, those first two Stooges albums contain some great songs, some absolute classics, but as a whole, they just don't resonate with me. I'll play I Wanna Be Your Dog, No Fun, 1969, TVI, Till the Day I Die, but like I said, there are parts of those albums that just don't float my boat. But it's the third album, Raw Power. That is just unbelievable. Yes, it does sound like somebody recorded it in the studio toilets, but it's still one of rock's greatest ever albums. After all these years, it still amazes and bemuses me how a record company, how management can be so blind to the masterpiece right there under your noses. So let's have a little of Raw Power's bizarre history. After the original Stooges broke up, Iggy Pop signed as a solo artist to Columbia Records and relocated to London to record an album, accompanied by guitarist James Williamson. James had been a former member of the Stooges. He had joined the band in late 1970 through to 1971. But Iggy and James were unable to find a suitable rhythm section for their music. Columbia assigned them some guys from the Pink Fairies. Now I can't see that working at all. So what they did was they called in former Stooges, Ron Ashton on bass guitar, and his brother Scott on drums. Iggy amazingly produced and mixed the album himself, but had no regard for balance or tone, and apparently only used 3 tracks of the 24 available. So Tony DeFries, Iggy's manager, informed Iggy that the album would be remixed by David Bowie. David Bowie: I listened to the 24 track tape. Iggy had the band on one track, lead guitar on another, and him on a third. Out of 24 tracks, there were just 3 tracks that were used. Iggy said to me, "See what you can do with this." I said, "Jim, there's nothing to mix." So we just pushed the vocal up and down a lot. On at least 4 or 5 songs, that was the situation, including Search and Destroy. That's got such a peculiar sound because all we did was occasionally bring the lead guitar up and take it out. Now here's where the plot thins. When Morgan Neville's documentary on Raw Power was released in 2010, they demonstrated that each individual instrument was indeed recorded on its own track, on the original multi-track tapes, suggesting that Bowie was either mistaken or working with a copy that had mixed down the instruments on the same track. However, in 1996, Columbia invited Iggy to remix the entire album for its re-release on CD. Now, some people prefer that mix, some people prefer Bowie's. It still sounds pretty bad. Somewhere in those mixes you have Scott Ashton beating the living crap out of his kit, Ron Ashton laying down some incredible, nimble bass lines. James Williamson was full of praise for Ron's bass playing. He says it really gave him a foundation to bounce off of. Williamson himself is quite simply on fire and demonstrates why many rate him as one of rock's greatest guitarists. Iggy Pop on James. He fills in every space there is. His playing is like a drug dog coming into your house. There is nowhere to go, nowhere to hide. Iggy in fact had to pitch his vocals an octave higher than his normal singing voice to find space for his vocals. And in Iggy Pop, you have one of rock's greatest frontmen ever to move across a stage. Iggy is on fire as soon as you drop the needle or press the play button. I'm a street-walking cheetah with a hide full of napalm. I'm the runaway son of a nuclear A-bomb. Search and Destroy is the opener, and you would be hard-pressed to find a better first track on any album. To call it blistering would be an understatement. Track 2, Gimme Danger, broods with a menace and a sexual tension. It starts off with a funky little laid-back groove from the Ashtons, with Williamson on acoustic in E-flat tuning. But it's that moment at 45 seconds in where Williamson's electric guitar enters that gets me every time. If that's the last few seconds of music I hear before I die, I'll die happy. Gimme danger, little stranger, and I will feel with you at ease. Gimme danger, little stranger, and I'll feel your disease. There's nothing in my dreams, just some ugly memories. Kiss me like the ocean breeze. At one point in the 1970s, it was rumoured that the Doors were going to approach Iggy as a replacement for Jim Morrison, but I think they probably had second thoughts. Iggy was probably far too out there for even the Doors. Raw Power is deranged, chaotic. Everything feels like at any moment it's just all gonna fall apart, and the band are gonna start fighting with each other. Everything a great rock and roll album should be. But Iggy and the boys somehow hold it all together and create a mind-blowing colossus of an album. On its release, Raw Power was given little promotion and seemingly sunk without trace, dead and buried. But like the zombie, one of the living dead that Iggy resembled on its cover, it rose again. Teenagers all over the world were listening, learning and taking notes. When UK punk exploded in late 1976, Raw Power was the album often cited by many of that movement for their reason for picking up an instrument. Steve Jones of the Sex Pistols said he played it night after night and learnt every song till his fingers bled. But over the years, the album has grown and grown in stature and now is recognised as the classic it is. My next video will be covering the New York scene in the mid-70s, the Ramones, Patti Smith, Television, Talking Heads, among others. So I hope you like part 1 of my journey through punk. Please give us a like, subscribe to the channel, stay safe, stay well, and I'll see you in the next video.